I want you to imagine a world roughly 3 million years ago.
Okay.
But you aren't looking at people. You aren't looking at armies or treaties or, some king drawing a line on a parchment map.
Right. None of that exists yet.
Exactly. You are watching the planet itself violently tear up the map.
Oh, yeah.
The Earth is buckling. Tectonic plates are colliding in this agonizing slow motion, just grinding against each other deep in the crust and pushing up a massive, completely volatile chain of volcanoes.
A literal ring of fire.
Yeah. And right there, right between these two massive continents, the oceans are literally splitting apart. This narrow, jagged, 50-mile-wide strip of rock and mud just violently rises from the boiling sea. It is a moment of pure planetary chaos.
It's incredible to think about.
Yeah.
Because it completely redefines that old idea of geography as destiny.
Right.
Because that violent geological rupture, it didn't just create a new piece of land. It severed a global ocean and stitched together an entire hemisphere.
And that is exactly where we are starting this journey. So welcome to the very first chapter of our 18-part deep dive into the epic history of the Isthmus of Panama.
We're finally doing it.
We're doing it because to really grasp the unbelievable human drama that we're going to unpack in this series, to understand why global empires like Spain, France, Scotland, the US, why they would spend 500 years killing each other over this exact spot, you have to understand the deep backstory of the land itself.
You really do.
So we are going way back.
Yeah.
Long before the Europeans arrived, long before the canals were ever dug. Our mission today is to look at how this tiny, narrow geographic anomaly became a bridge, a brutal biological wall, and, a bustling indigenous metropolis of trade.
Long before anyone across the Atlantic even suspected it existed.
Exactly.
But to do that, we have to completely discard this persistent, really romanticized myth of the empty jungle.
Oh, yeah, the pristine wilderness idea.
Right. There's this pervasive idea that the Americas, and specifically the dense rainforests of Central America, were these untouched wildernesses, just passively waiting to be discovered.
Which is just wild to think about now.
It's not just slightly flawed. It is entirely false. I mean, the Isthmus of Panama was a highly sophisticated biological and cultural choke point. It was heavily managed, densely populated, and fiercely defended.
By people who had absolutely mastered one of the most complex environments on Earth.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before a single human foot could walk across that choke point, the land itself had to be forged. So let's go straight into the deep time of geology.
Let's do it.
If we look at the last 60 million years of Earth's history, for the vast majority of that time, North America and South America were completely divorced from one another.
Just not touching at all.
Right. There was a massive deep water strait separating them. It's known in the sources as the Central American Seaway.
Which is, honestly, incredibly disorienting to picture today.
It really is.
Because when you look at a globe, we are so conditioned to see the Americas as this massive, continuous vertical wall stretching from the Arctic all the way down to Antarctica.
But for tens of millions of years, the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean were just freely mixing. The equatorial currents flowed unimpeded right around the globe.
Sloshing back and forth.
Yeah. You had marine life like massive prehistoric sharks, megalodons swimming freely between what is now the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean.
And those waters, they exchanged heat, they exchanged salinity, and they essentially maintained a very specific global climate system.
And then the planet decides to just reorganize the furniture.
As it does.
Deep beneath the ocean floor, the Farallon Plate and the Caribbean Plate collide. The friction melts the rock, magma surges upward, and this island arc of volcanoes begins to erupt from the seafloor.
Slowly building up over millions of years.
Right. Sediment builds up between them, and eventually they fuse into a solid landmass. The gap is sealed. But here's what I find absolutely fascinating in the sources.
The debate. Yes. The scientific community is currently locked in this massive high-stakes debate about when exactly that final seal happened. Oh, it is one of the most intense, ongoing debates in paleogeology right now.
It's wild.
Because for decades, really since the 1970s, the standard textbook date for the final closure of the Isthmus of Panama was roughly 3 million years ago, or about 2.8 million to be highly precise.
And that was based on fossilized ocean mud, right?
Yeah, exactly. They were analyzing marine fossils, specifically these microscopic organisms called foraminifera. Scientists looked at the ocean floor sediment and noticed that right around 2.8 million years ago, the microscopic life in the Caribbean suddenly became distinctly different from the microscopic life in the Pacific.
Because they couldn't mix anymore.
Right. The only logical conclusion was that a physical wall had just separated them. And that 3 million-year date was heavily affirmed by a massive international geological study in 2016.
But, science is a living argument.
Yeah.
And there's a major competing theory out
The
there.
huge one.
A highly publicized analysis led by Smithsonian researchers back in 2015 essentially looked at that 3 million-year date and said, well, no, you're actually off by a magnitude of 10 million years.
Which is a staggering claim.
It's huge. They argued that a land connection, or at least a highly significant partial land bridge, formed much earlier, roughly 13 to 15 million years ago.
And they based this on completely different evidence. Instead of looking at microscopic sea life, they're looking at ancient, fossilized riverbeds in South America.
And what did they find in the riverbeds?
Zircon crystals.
Okay, zircon crystals.
Yeah, and these specific crystals have a chemical signature proving they were forged in the Panamanian volcanoes.
Oh, wow.
Right, meaning there had to be a terrestrial river system flowing from Panama down into South America 15 million years ago.
To carry the crystals down there.
Exactly. And they also found fossils of North American land mammals in South American rock layers dating back 10 million years.
Well, yeah, if a rhinoceros-like animal walked from North America to South America 10 million years ago, there had to be something for it to walk on.
You would think so?
But I can hear you, the listener, listening to this and wondering, why does a 10 million year discrepancy matter to us today? Whether it was 3 million or 15 million years ago, we are talking about ancient history. Why are geologists fighting over this?
Because the exact timeline of this land bridge is literally the linchpin for our entire understanding of modern planetary climate.
Wait, really? The whole climate?
The whole thing. Closing the Central American Seaway didn't just stop fish from swimming back and forth. It fundamentally reorganized global ocean circulation.
Okay, how?
When you stop the Atlantic and Pacific waters from flowing into each other, the powerful currents that used to flow westward through the gap suddenly hit a solid wall.
Okay, it's exactly like throwing a massive concrete dam across a raging continent-sized river.
That's a perfect analogy.
The water has to go somewhere, right? It backs up, it redirects, and the sheer volume of that redirected energy ends up altering the weather on the completely opposite side of the planet.
Exactly. The water hitting the new Panamanian wall was deflected northward. And this redirection is widely recognized as the specific mechanism that dramatically strengthened the Atlantic Gulf Stream.
So you suddenly had this massive conveyor belt of warm, salty equatorial water being forced up the eastern coast of North America and directly across the Atlantic toward Europe.
Right, which sets up this incredible paradox.
Because you'd think warm water equals warm weather.
You'd think so. But when you send trillions of gallons of warm tropical water toward the North Pole, you don't get a tropical paradise. You get a catastrophic deep freeze.
Which sounds completely backwards.
It seems entirely counterintuitive until you break down the atmospheric mechanics. Warm water evaporates much faster than cold water.
Oh, right. So it's pumping moisture into the air.
Immense amounts of warm moisture into the Arctic air. And more atmospheric moisture directly translates to massive increases in precipitation.
Because the northern latitudes were still geographically located in a cold region of the globe, all that new tropical moisture just fell from the sky as snow.
Tons of it. Year after year, the snow accumulated way faster than it could ever melt in the summer. It compacted into ice. The white ice reflected sunlight back into space, cooling the planet further.
Causes more snow.
Exactly. It's a runaway feedback loop.
So the rise of this tiny 50-mile-wide strip of volcanic rock in Central America is fundamentally linked to the onset of the Northern Hemisphere Ice Age.
It is. But geologists are very careful with how they frame the causality here. This is why the debate we mentioned earlier is so crucial.
You're right, the timeline debate.
Yeah. If the isthmus closed 3 million years ago, it perfectly coincides with the start of the major Northern Hemisphere glaciations. It acts as the smoking gun, the primary trigger.
But if the Smithsonian researchers are right,
Right. If it closed 15 million years ago, then the onset of the Ice Age 3 million years ago must have been triggered by something else entirely. Perhaps shifts in the Earth's orbital tilt. And the isthmus was merely a contributing factor that set the stage long beforehand.
Even with the debate, though, the sheer scale of consequence here is just staggering. I mean, the next time you find yourself digging your car out of a freezing blizzard in Chicago, or, the next time you enjoy the unnaturally mild winter in London, you are experiencing the direct meteorological echo of tectonic plates colliding in Central America millions of years ago.
It completely rewired the globe.
It really did. But while the isthmus was busy rewiring the oceans and the atmosphere, it was also setting the stage for arguably the most chaotic biological collision in the history of the planet.
Oh, absolutely.
Because while it acted as a dam for the oceans, it acted as a massive superhighway for land animals. This initiates what evolutionary biologists call the Great American Biotic Interchange.
The Ngäbe.
The Ngäbe. I love that acronym. Once that land bridge was fully exposed and covered in vegetation, the isolation of the continents was broken. Mammals that had been evolving in completely different worlds for tens of millions of years suddenly found a door kicked open.
And they began pouring across this new land bridge in both directions.
But, the word bridge is almost deceptive here, isn't it?
It really is, because it implies a neutral piece of infrastructure that anyone can use. The reality of the Isthmus of Panama was much more brutal. It was a phenomenon known as the firewall paradox.
The firewall paradox.
Yeah. The land was simultaneously a welcoming open corridor for some species and an impenetrable lethal brick wall for others. It was an incredibly selective environmental filter.
Okay, let's break down who actually made it through that filter. Looking at the southward migrants, the animals moving from the temperate landscapes of North America down into the unknown environments of South America, we see a massive surge of large carnivores and hoofed mammals.
Right, we were talking about bears, dogs, massive prehistoric cats, horses.
They pushed through the Panamanian choke point, and when they hit South America, they absolutely flourished. But there is a specific animal in this group that completely shatters our modern assumptions.
Oh, the camels.
Yes, the camel. It is a brilliant example of how environments force adaptation.
It really is. Because when most people hear camelids moving south, they picture a dromedary camel with a hump built for the bone-dry Sahara Desert, suddenly trying to wade through a humid, muddy, densely packed tropical rainforest in Panama.
Right. It sounds like a biological death sentence. You would assume they would just overheat, sink in the mud, and die.
But they didn't.
They didn't. North American camelids successfully navigated that dense, hot jungle corridor. They pushed all the way down into the South American continent, and then they adapted spectacularly to an entirely new extreme environment.
The freezing high-altitude peaks of the Andes Mountains.
Which is insane. They underwent this profound evolutionary divergence. They shed the traits of the open plains and developed hyper-specialized adaptations for altitude.
Their blood chemistry literally changed to absorb oxygen more efficiently in thin air.
Wow.
They developed incredibly dense fleeces to survive sub-zero Andean nights. And they developed specialized padded feet to grip sheer rocky inclines without destroying the fragile alpine soil.
So those ancient North American migrants evolved into the llama, the alpaca, the guanaco, and the vicuña.
They didn't just survive the Panamanian crossing, they are the ultimate poster children of southward migratory triumph.
It is wild to think that the llama, like the absolute icon of the Incan Empire in the South American mountains, is the descendant of an animal that had to brave a tropical Central American jungle.
It's an incredible journey.
But not every animal was capable of that kind of biological plasticity. The firewall rejected a lot of applicants.
Oh, heavily rejected. The bison is probably the most famous victim of the Panamanian Wall.
Millions of bison dominated the Great Plains of North America, but they never managed to establish a single population south of the isthmus.
Because it wasn't a paved highway. It was a suffocating, dense, lowland tropical jungle.
I mean, think about the biomechanics of a bison. It is basically a giant, heavy, fur-covered combine harvester.
That's a great visual.
It's built for sweeping, horizontal movement across flat plains, right? Putting its massive head down to graze on tough, low-lying prairie grasses. If you drop a bison into a dense rainforest, it is a nightmare scenario.
Complete nightmare. The humidity alone causes massive overheating under that thick coat.
And the mud.
Yeah, the constant mud and dampness lead to severe hoof rot. The root structures of tropical trees are massive and vertical, making horizontal movement nearly impossible for them.
And most importantly, there is virtually no grass on the floor of a primary rainforest because the canopy blocks all the sunlight. A bison in Panama is basically a starving engine overheating in a maze.
The environment itself physically repelled them.
And we see the exact same selective filtering happening in the other direction, right?
We do. There was an incredible menagerie of strange, wonderful creatures moving from South America northward. Opossums, armadillos, porcupines, and capybaras successfully navigated the jungle and spread into North America.
And some spectacular giants, too.
Oh yeah, massive ground sloths the size of elephants, and glyptodonts, which were essentially these mammals heavily armored like ankylosaurs.
Like walking tanks.
Basically. They successfully reached North America, though they would obviously later fall victim to Pleistocene extinctions.
But the South American tropical specialists, the animals intimately tied to the rainforest canopy, they hit the exact same wall the bison hit, just in reverse.
Exactly. New World monkeys, tree-dwelling anteaters, specialized sloths, they largely stayed trapped in the south.
Because they couldn't push past the tropical bridge into the cooler, temperate, seasonal forests of North America, they just lacked the biological flexibility to leave the canopy.
And when you zoom out and look at the macro-level results of this massive biological swap, you uncover a staggering asymmetry.
It was not a fair fight.
Not at all. It was not an equal exchange. The northern lineages that migrated south were exponentially more successful than the southern lineages that moved north.
The Northerners didn't just move into the neighborhood, they essentially burned it down and took over.
They really caused a massive ecological upheaval. And the underlying mechanism here is the devastating vulnerability of evolutionary isolation.
Right, because South America had been cut off for so long.
For tens of millions of years, the South American continent had been an island. Its animals had evolved in a completely closed arena. Their apex predators were largely marsupials, like the sparacidans.
Which were formidable, sure.
They were, but they had completely different reproductive and metabolic strategies than placental mammals.
So when the land bridge forms, you suddenly introduce this wave of highly advanced placental carnivores, saber-toothed cats, wolves, bears, that have spent millions of years fighting for survival on the massive, hyper-competitive land masses of North America and Eurasia.
Exactly. The South American fauna simply hadn't evolved the behavioral defenses or the sheer competitive edge to deal with these new, highly efficient killers and grazers.
Well,
the northern invaders outhunted the native predators and outgrazed the native herbivores. It contributed to a massive, tragic wave of extinctions across the South American continent.
it's a brutal illustration of how geography dictates biology. But here is where we have to pivot to the single most important factor for human history.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Because the most crucial biological filter of the Isthmus of Panama wasn't stopping bison, and it wasn't stopping monkeys. The most important thing this firewall stopped was entirely invisible to the naked eye.
We are talking about microscopic pathogens.
Right. Specifically, yellow fever and Plasmodium falciparum malaria.
Yes. If you want to understand the later history of Panama, the colonial graveyards, the abandoned French canal equipment rusting in the jungle, the staggering death tolls, you have to understand that these specific diseases were completely 100% absent from the pre-Columbian Americas.
Which is so crazy to think about because we have this deeply ingrained cultural association that tropical jungles are inherently swarming with malaria and yellow fever. But for thousands of years, the people living on the isthmus were completely free of these specific killers.
And the mechanism behind this absence is fascinating. It's not just that the viruses and parasites weren't there. The crucial delivery system was missing.
The mosquito.
Right. Both yellow fever and the most lethal strains of malaria are primarily transmitted by a very specific mosquito vector, Aedes aegypti.
And that mosquito did not exist in the Western Hemisphere.
No, it is native to Africa.
So the Panamanian jungle wasn't a physical wall against these diseases. It was a firewall in time.
A delayed inevitability. The pre-Columbian indigenous populations, isolated for millennia, had absolutely zero genetic or acquired immunity to these specific pathogens. So when the firewall in time was finally breached post-1492, the results were apocalyptic. But it's vital to understand how they arrived.
Because the diseases didn't just float across the ocean.
No, they were actively imported through the mechanics of empire. European ships brought the viruses in the bloodstreams of human hosts. And tragically, the transatlantic slave trade ships brought the Aedes aegypti mosquito larvae.
Just surviving in the stagnant water casks in the ship's holds.
Exactly. It was a dual ecological invasion that permanently weaponized the Panamanian landscape.
Wow. But before we move on, we have to make a very specific correction to a widely circulated myth regarding Andean diseases. There is a tendency in the sources to assume the isthmus blocked everything coming up from the south, including Chagas disease.
Oh, yeah, that is a critical error to correct. Chagas disease, which is caused by the parasite Trypanosoma cruzi and transmitted by the kissing bug, was absolutely not blocked by the Panamanian firewall.
It was already there.
It is a genuinely ancient, endemic American pathogen.
And the proof for this is astonishing. We aren't just guessing based on genetics here. Paleopathologists have examined a 9,000-year-old chinchorro mummy from the South American coast.
9,000 years old.
Yeah, and they found undeniable evidence of the T. cruzi parasite in its tissues. Furthermore, when analyzing ancient coastal Andean populations, they found infection rates hovering around 40%.
Wow.
Chagas was already widespread, deeply entrenched in both North and South American populations. Long before the first European sails ever appeared on the horizon, it bypassed the firewall completely.
Because the biological reality of the isthmus is incredibly nuanced. And what I find so compelling is that we're not just talking about ancient history here.
No.
We aren't just talking about giant sloths and prehistoric mosquitoes. This ancient geographical firewall is still actively dictating human infrastructure today.
Right now, at this exact second. I mean, imagine you decide you are going to drive the Pan-American Highway.
The ultimate road trip.
You want to execute the ultimate road trip.
Yeah.
You start your engine on the frozen coast of Alaska and you start driving south, aiming for the tip of Argentina. You cruise down through North America, you navigate the mountains of Central America, you drive deep into Panama, and then suddenly the asphalt just ends.
You hit a town called Yavisa. And beyond Yavisa, the road simply ceases to exist.
It just stops. It doesn't pick up again for roughly 60 miles until you reach a town called Turbo in Colombia. That missing 60-mile stretch of dense, roadless rainforest, swamp, and mountainous jungle is known as the Darien Gap.
It is the only missing link in the entire hemisphere-spanning road system.
You physically cannot drive a car between North and South America.
And the terrain of the Darien Gap is legendarily unforgiving. It is a labyrinth of steep ravines, venomous snakes, bottomless mud.
But the road remains unbuilt, not because modern engineering is incapable of paving over a swamp, right? We have built roads through much worse.
Far worse. The road remains unbuilt by deliberate design. The ancient biological firewall is actively, legally being maintained.
The United States Department of Agriculture has actually been one of the primary opponents of completing the Pan-American Highway through the Darien Gap, and their reasoning has nothing to do with saving trees. It goes right back to the animals.
Right. They are maintaining a literal, modern, biological barricade against foot and mouth disease.
Which is terrifying for farmers.
It's a highly contagious, economically devastating viral disease that targets cattle, swine, and sheep. And while it is endemic in certain regions of South America, it has been completely eradicated and absent from North and Central America since 1954.
So the USDA knows that the moment you pour asphalt through the Darien Gap, you create a high-speed conduit.
Exactly. A single infected cow on a truck from South America could bypass the jungle, drive north, and trigger an outbreak that could inflict billions of dollars in damage to the North American agricultural economy.
So millions of years after tectonic plates pushed this rock out of the sea, we are still relying on its physical geography to act as a bouncer, keeping pathogens out. We haven't conquered the landscape at all. We're still negotiating the terms of our survival with it.
We really are. And looking at that roadless jungle of the Darien Gap today, it's incredibly easy to fall back into that myth we mentioned earlier.
The empty jungle myth.
Right. You see an impenetrable wall of green, and you falsely assume it was always this wild, empty, untouched barrier. But if you rewind the clock,
you realize you're looking at what used to be a bustling superhighway. The archaeological and anthropological record is entirely unambiguous here. By roughly 6,000 to 11,000 years ago, humans had not only reached the isthmus, they were firmly and deeply established across its entirety.
this was not a passive wilderness.
No, it was a heavily managed, aggressively engineered, and densely connected cultural landscape.
Let's examine three distinct indigenous societies that dominated this landscape. And it is crucial to emphasize that we are not talking about vanished, mythical pre-Columbians fading into the mist.
Right, these are real people.
These were dynamic, deeply complex nations. And despite centuries of colonial violence, their descendants are still present, still self-governing, and still fighting for their sovereignty in Panama today.
Let's start by looking at the east, right around that area of the Darien Gap we just talked about. At the time of European contact, this region, known as the Grand Darien, was dominated by a people known as the Cueva.
The Cueva operated a highly structured, intensely political society. They were organized into a network of competitive chiefdoms, or cacicazgos.
Okay.
To understand the Cueva, you have to picture the power dynamics of a paramount chief, or cacique. These weren't just symbolic leaders. A powerful cacique wielded absolute authority over vast territories. They commanded immense labor forces to build palisaded villages and clear agricultural land. They commanded thousands of disciplined warriors.
Picture the scene of a cacique receiving tribute. You wouldn't just see a few baskets of fruit. You would see fleets of dugout canoes arriving at a central village, laden with dried maize, smoked fish, massive sea turtle shells, woven cotton mantles, and intricately hammered gold ornaments.
It was a very rich society.
Very. The caciques engaged in constant shifting alliances, marrying their rivals' daughters to secure peace, or launching brutal raids to capture resources and prisoners. It was a world of high-stakes diplomacy and warfare.
But the narrative of the Cueva features one of the most sudden and profound demographic tragedies in human history.
Yeah.
Within a matter of decades following Spanish contact, the Cueva were effectively annihilated.
It was a dual apocalypse.
Precisely. They were hit simultaneously by the biological bomb of introduced European diseases, against which they had absolutely no immunological defense, and the sheer unrestrained brutality of the Spanish conquest.
Right.
The violence wasn't just battlefield warfare. It was the systemic destruction of their social fabric, enslavement, and the deliberate dismantling of their agricultural systems, which led to mass starvation.
Because their society collapsed so rapidly, their archaeological footprint is agonizingly thin today. They built primarily with wood and thatch, which, the jungle consumes in a matter of years.
It disappears.
Their rapid disappearance meant a whole world, a whole complex political ecosystem, was essentially wiped off the map before it could be thoroughly documented. It makes every artifact we find incredibly precious.
It does. But in stark contrast to the rapid collapse of the Cueva, we look at the resilience of the second major group, the Guna. In older historical texts, you will frequently see them spelled K-U-N-A.
The Guna are defined by this fierce, unyielding commitment to independence. Originally, their populations were concentrated deep in the interior of the Darien, but as the Spanish pressure mounted, they made this brilliant, strategic territorial shift.
They moved.
Over generations, they migrated toward the Caribbean coast and established themselves on the San Blas Islands.
And today, that region is the legally recognized autonomous territory of Gunayala. What makes the Guna so deeply fascinating is their political architecture.
How so?
Unlike the Cueva, who concentrated power in the hands of a single paramount cacique, the Guna developed a profoundly democratic, consensus-based system of governance.
They govern through local leaders known as salas. But the sala isn't a dictator. The power rests in large communal congresses. When a major decision needs to be made, the community gathers and they debate. They talk it out until a consensus is reached.
And that decentralized structure is arguably the specific mechanism of their survival.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. When a colonial power tries to conquer a centralized chiefdom, they just capture or kill the king and the whole structure falls.
Right. Cut off the head of the snake.
But how do you conquer a society where power is distributed among thousands of people in communal congresses across dozens of islands? You can't cut off the head because the whole community is the head.
That is brilliant. It allowed them to resist assimilation, resist the Spanish, resist later Panamanian governments, and maintain their sovereignty.
Truly.
Now, you cannot talk about Guna culture without talking about their legendary aesthetic tradition, the mola.
Oh, the molas are beautiful.
If you have ever seen a mola, it is this breathtakingly intricate, incredibly vibrant textile. It is made using a complex reverse applique technique. Multiple layers of different colored fabrics are sewn together, and then patterns are cut through the pop layers to reveal the colors underneath.
It is a stunning display of geometric precision and storytelling. But the mola didn't just spontaneously appear when they acquired scissors and commercial cloth.
No.
Anthropologists understand that these intricate textile designs evolved directly from much older pre-contact traditions of elaborate full-body painting.
Oh, wow.
When missionaries and colonial authorities began forcing the Guna to wear clothing, the Guna subverted that assimilation. They simply took their ancient sacred body paint designs and translated them onto the very fabric they were being forced to wear.
So the molas is literally a garment of resistance and cultural continuity, which brings us to the third society, the people who represent the largest indigenous population living in Panama today, the Ngäbe-Buglé. You will often see them referred to in older colonial-era documents under the umbrella term Guaymi, but they are two distinct linguistic groups, the Ngäbe and the Buglé, sharing a unified political territory.
Their ancestral stronghold is the western highlands of Panama, regions like Chiriquí and Veraguas, and their defining strategy for survival against the Spanish Empire was the brilliant weaponization of their landscape. They utilized what we call vertical geography.
Okay, vertical geography. Imagine trying to ride a heavily armored Spanish war horse, carrying a musket up a 45-degree incline of slick mud and dense rainforest.
It is a logistical nightmare.
A complete nightmare.
The Western Highlands are incredibly rugged. We are talking about deep river canyons, steep broken mountain ridges, and relentless terrain. The Ngäbe-Buglé used this vertical geography as an impenetrable natural fortress.
They built their communities high up on the ridges. By living in these elevated, inaccessible landscapes, they created a physical barrier that negated all the technological advantages of the Spanish cavalry and artillery.
The terrain itself fought the invaders, allowing the Ngäbe-Buglé to maintain a high degree of cultural and demographic integrity.
Now, I want to clarify a specific point regarding how they organize their society. In a lot of early anthropological outlines, you'll see them quickly categorized as matrilineal, meaning you trace your descent and inheritance exclusively through your mother's bloodline.
That is an oversimplification that really needs to be corrected. While women hold immense respect and play crucial roles in social cohesion, it's much more accurate to describe their descent system as bilateral.
Bilateral, so deeply kin and clan-based.
Yes. Your identity and your access to resources, like land for farming, are determined by a complex, flexible network of ties to both your mother's and your father's extended families. It is a highly adaptable social fabric designed to maximize a family's ability to survive a difficult environment.
So we have these three powerful, distinct societies mastering different parts of the isthmus. But how are they actually surviving? I mean, if you have a population of tens of thousands of people, you can't just wander around picking wild berries. You have to engineer the land to produce massive amounts of calories.
You do. And farming the tropics is one of the most difficult agricultural challenges on Earth.
It seems like it would be easy because everything is green.
Right. A primary rainforest looks lush and green, so you naturally assume the dirt underneath it is incredibly rich. But tropical soils are famously fragile. They are highly acidic and nutrient poor. Almost all the biological wealth, all the carbon and nitrogen, is locked up in the living canopy of the trees, not in the dirt.
If you bring in a tractor, clear-cut a mile of rainforest, and try to plow it like a farm in Iowa, the first heavy rainy season will simply wash all the exposed, sterile clay away. You are left with the desert.
To survive, the indigenous peoples of the isthmus perfected swidden agriculture, commonly known as slash and burn.
Which usually has a bad reputation.
It does. When practiced by massive, modern industrial logging companies, slash and burn is an ecological disaster. But when practiced sustainably by smaller indigenous populations, it is a highly sophisticated way of hacking the carbon cycle of the rainforest.
They aren't just farming the dirt, they are farming the ashes of the jungle.
Exactly. You go into the forest and clear a small targeted patch. You allow the cut vegetation to dry, and then you burn it. That fire takes all the nutrients locked in the wood and leaves and deposits them directly onto the soil in the form of a rich layer of ash.
You have essentially created instant fertilizer.
Boom. Instant fertilizer.
And what are they planting in that ash?
They engineered a highly diverse polyculture. They planted maize as the staple carbohydrate. They planted root crops like cassava, also known as manioc, and sweet potatoes, which are incredibly hardy and can survive heavy rains.
And crucially, they cultivated cacao.
Yes, cacao. Which wasn't just a food, but a deeply sacred ceremonial drink and a vital trade currency. They would farm a plot for a few years until the ash nutrients depleted, and then they would abandon it, allowing the jungle to reclaim it and regenerate while they moved to a new patch. It is a rotational system that mimics the natural disturbances of the forest.
But they weren't just tied to their ash gardens. They were moving across this landscape with incredible efficiency. They completely mastered the river systems. The rivers were the highways, and their vehicles were masterfully carved dugout canoes known as cayucos.
And a skilled paddler in a cayuco could navigate terrifying rapids and glide silently through shallow coastal swamps. They used these canoes to harvest the immense wealth of the oceans, fishing, gathering crabs, and diving for massive pearls in places like the Pearl Islands in the Pacific.
And this brings us to one of the most mind-blowing historical connections. If you look at the maps of the trade routes they were running in these cayucos, you see them utilizing specific rivers to cross the continental divide. One of the primary arteries was a river called the Chagres.
The Chagres River?
The Chagres River flows in a highly unusual way that allows you to paddle incredibly close to the Pacific slope before having to get out and carry your canoe. Thousands of years later, when the United States engineers arrived to build the Panama Canal, they didn't just magically discover a route.
No, they didn't.
They looked at the geography and decided to dam up the exact same river. Gatun Lake, the massive artificial heart of the Panama Canal, is just the flooded valley of the Chagres. The indigenous peoples were utilizing the prime logistical infrastructure of the isthmus thousands of years before the first steam shovel was even invented.
Which brings us to the ultimate realization about the Isthmus of Panama. Long before the canal, long before the Spanish galleons loaded with silver, this narrow strip of land was the original, undisputed trade choke point of the Americas.
And the indigenous people sitting on that choke point were the ultimate middlemen. If you wanted to move a rare commodity from the sprawling civilizations of South America up into Mesoamerica, or if you wanted to trade Pacific goods for Caribbean goods, you had to cross their territory.
You had to go through them. They facilitated a vast economic network through a mechanism anthropologists call down-the-line exchange.
Because it's not like a single merchant was packing a giant backpack in Peru and hiking 3,000 miles to Mexico.
No, it operates much more like a continental game of telephone. Goods are passed from community to community. A coastal village trades salt and pearls to an inland village for maize. That inland village trades the pearls to a mountain chiefdom for woven cotton. The mountain chief trades it northward for jade.
And because all of these goods are being funneled across the narrowest piece of land on the hemisphere, every time an item changes hands on the isthmus, it gains immense prestige and value. The physical geography of Panama acted as a massive amplifier for wealth.
And we aren't just theorizing about this wealth. We have the absolute proof pulled straight from the earth. When archaeologists excavate the central Panama region known as Gran Cocle, they uncover a world of staggering opulence.
The elite tombs at sites like Sitio Conte and El Caño represent the absolute pinnacle of this wealth, reaching their peak roughly between 700 and 1000 CE.
The burials in these tombs paint a picture of lords who commanded unimaginable resources. They are buried with intricate gold breastplates, cuffs, and helmets. They have mirrors made of polished iron pyrite that would flash blindly in the tropical sun.
And my absolute favorite detail. They wore necklaces made from fossilized megalodon teeth.
That is just insane.
Imagine a paramount chief, covered in hammered gold, wearing the tooth of a prehistoric giant shark that he pulled from ancient marine deposits. That is the ultimate flex of spiritual and earthly power. But among all that gold, there's one specific item found in those tombs that serves as the smoking gun for this massive continental trade network.
The emeralds.
Yes. In 2026, a groundbreaking scientific study completely changed our understanding of Gran Cocle. Researchers took the raw, unpolished green stones that were buried alongside these Panamanian chiefs and analyzed their chemical signatures. They proved unequivocally that these stones were Colombian emeralds.
To understand the weight of that discovery, you have to trace the path. Those emeralds had to be mined deep in the Colombian Andes. They then had to enter the down-the-line exchange network, being traded from hand to hand, carried overland through hundreds of miles of dense jungle, over the Darien Gap and across the mountains, to finally be buried with a chief in central Panama.
Wow.
It is undeniable, hard evidence of a deeply entrenched, highly sophisticated trade corridor spanning massive distances.
And they weren't just trading physical rocks, they were trading knowledge. They were trading the cutting-edge technology of the ancient world.
This is perhaps their greatest contribution to the broader history of the Americas. Gold working technology, the incredibly complex metallurgical knowledge of how to mine, smelt, alloy, and cast gold using advanced techniques like lost wax casting, was not invented everywhere at once. It was developed in the Andes of South America.
And it entered the rest of the Americas exclusively through the Panamanian corridor.
Exclusively. Around the year 200 CE, the techniques of metallurgy crossed the Darien Gap from Colombia into Panama.
And from Panama, it slowly filtered northward into Mesoamerica. The Panamanian middlemen were the sole gatekeepers of this profound technological advancement. Without them, the majestic gold artifacts we associate with the later Aztec and Maya civilizations simply might not exist in the way we know them. The metallurgical history of an entire continent was bottlenecked through this 50-mile strip of land.
Now, anytime you talk about massive amounts of gold flowing up from South America into Panama, there's an immediate, almost reflexive assumption that people make, and we need to kill this myth right now. People immediately say, oh, it must be Incan gold.
The instinct is to jump to the most famous empire in the textbook, but the basic chronology of history completely shatters that assumption.
It does. The wealth found in the Ngäbe-Buglé tombs, the gold and the emeralds, came from the incredibly sophisticated cultures of Colombia. The Incan Empire, as a vast, conquering entity, didn't even exist until the 1400s.
Right.
That is roughly 4 to 7 centuries after the paramount chiefs of Ngäbe-Buglé were at the absolute height of their power, around 700 to 1000 CE. A Panamanian chief in the year 800 CE couldn't trade with an Inca because the Incan Empire wasn't there yet.
We have to give the credit to the complex, ancient Colombian and Panamanian trade networks that long predated the famous empires of the Andes.
It forces us to realize just how deep and ancient the roots of civilization in this hemisphere truly are.
So we have covered a staggering amount of time today. If we step back and look at the massive narrative arc we've traced.
It is a breathtaking journey of cause and effect.
We started 3 million years ago with a violent tectonic collision that raised a wall of rock from the sea, physically rerouting the world's oceans and permanently shifting the global climate into an ice age. We saw how that new land acted as a brutal, selective biological firewall, a bridge that forced camels to adapt into llamas, a wall that trapped the bison in the north, and crucially, a firewall in time that kept the deadly devastation of yellow fever and malaria out of the Americas for thousands of years.
And finally, we saw how that dynamic, dangerous landscape was mastered by brilliant indigenous societies. The Cueva, the Guna, the Ngäbe-Buglé, people who engineered the sterile tropical soils into massive food surpluses, navigated the treacherous rivers, and turned the narrowest choke point on Earth into a thriving metropolis of international trade, hoarding emeralds and passing the secrets of gold northward.
But the archaeology leaves us with one incredibly tantalizing, completely unsolved mystery. We talked about how wealthy and powerful those central Panama chiefdoms at Ngäbe-Buglé were. But right around the year 1000 CE, something deeply unsettling happens in the dirt. All of that prestige trade just stops.
It is a massive, abrupt silence in the archaeological record. The Colombian emeralds vanish. The elaborate gold workings disappear from new burials. Those massive elite ceremonial centers like El Caño and Sitio Conte are simply abandoned to the jungle.
It's gone.
Fires go out and the paramount chiefs are gone.
And no one knows why. Did the climate shift? Was there a massive El Niño event that caused decades of drought leading to mass starvation and the collapse of the social hierarchy? Did the trade routes shift to the Caribbean coast, bypassing them entirely? Was it catastrophic internal warfare? The jungle reclaimed the monuments and the record goes silent. It is a haunting reminder that even the most powerful, wealthy nodes on a global trade network are incredibly fragile.
But here's the crucial takeaway. Even if those specific chiefdoms faded, the intrinsic value of the land itself never did. The geography remained.
And that is the thesis of this entire deep dive. Think about the exact transit corridors the indigenous peoples mapped out, the specific rivers they paddled to trade shells, the exact mountain passes they walked to exchange pearls and woven cotton.
The exact same routes.
Those are the exact same routes that the Spanish conquistadors would march across to move silver. They are the exact same routes the Scottish would try to colonize in a disastrous attempt to control global trade. They're the exact routes the French and the Americans would eventually dynamite to build the canal. The indigenous peoples didn't just passively survive on the isthmus, they identified and mapped the ultimate geopolitical prize centuries before the rest of the world even knew it existed.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it leaves us staring at a profound question about the future. For the last 3 million years, the immense gravity-like power of the Isthmus of Panama has derived from its unyielding physical geography. It has been a fixed, inescapable choke point between two vast oceans. If you wanted to move goods, animals, or power from one side of the world to the other, you physically had to go through Panama.
But the world is fundamentally changing.
We no longer live in a world bound strictly by the surface of the Earth. Modern aviation allows us to fly massive amounts of cargo directly over land masses, ignoring the choke points entirely. And far more pressingly, the very climate systems that the isthmus helped create 3 million years ago are now unraveling.
Right.
As global temperatures rise, the polar ice caps are melting at an unprecedented rate. This is actively opening up alternate year-round maritime shipping routes through the Arctic Ocean, like the Northwest Passage.
If a massive cargo ship from China can suddenly sail straight over the top of Canada to reach Europe, entirely bypassing the traffic jams and tolls of the Panama Canal, what happens to Panama? How long can a single 50-mile strip of rock and river continue to dictate the fate of global shipping and empires when the ice is disappearing?
If geography is destiny, as we said at the beginning, what happens to a nation's destiny when the global geography effectively melts and changes around it?
Think back to that opening image, that massive, violent tectonic buckling of the Earth 3 million years ago that forced the oceans apart. The Earth is still moving, the climate is still violently shifting. The story of Panama's geography isn't just ancient history trapped in a fossilized megalodon tooth. It is a living, breathing system that is still evolving and dictating power today. And as you watch the ice caps change, well, that is something deeply worth exploring on your own.